please help me welcome Lisa Carmen Wang.
All right, Carnegie Mellon University. What an accomplishment. So before I get started, I want you all to just take a moment to thank yourself for how hard you have worked to get here. I want you to just be proud of yourself, because not everyone gets into Carnegie Mellon University. And while you sit here on the precipice of what is about to be one of the most incredible journeys of growth, of learning, of opportunity, there's probably some of you who are also sitting here feeling a little nervous, a little anxious about what's to come. And I remember sitting at the beginning of my freshman year and having thoughts like, am I going to be good enough? Will I be smart enough? Will I be successful enough? Will I be strong enough? Will I be able to do enough? Am I ever going to be enough? And these are thoughts that plagued me throughout almost the entirety of my life, because there was one thing that I always chased from the very beginning, and that one thing was perfection. Perfection was something that I sought, that I mastered. As the daughter of immigrants, I understood the high stakes of failure. As a student, I slaved for straight A's. But especially as a national champion gymnast, I mastered the art of perfection, from pointed toes to perfect posture, and always the perfect position. Gymnastics brought with it a type of prestige. It brought applause. It brought perfect tens. And I was a shy child, and gymnastics gave me a stage upon which I could seek validation. I could gain approval from my coaches, judges, parents, and I never had to speak a single word. I was good at being perfect. I was obedient, I was hardworking, I was quiet, I was diligent, and I did what everybody told me to do. And boy, it felt good to be perfect. So perfection got me pretty far, because by the time I turned 18, I had already been US national champion for 3 years, and I had moved steadily from state champion to regional champion to national champion to Pan Am champion, and now here I was at the World Championships, the qualifier for the ultimate prize, the 2008 Beijing Olympic Games. So on that day, on the day of the World Championships, I remember standing on the edge of that mat, prepared to do my final routine. Everything had been perfect up to that point. And so I stood there, and they called my name. I walked onto that mat, prepared in my beginning pose, waiting for the music to begin. And as the music crescendoed, I felt my body move into the muscle memory of thousands and thousands of hours of training. But as the music kept going, I suddenly became hyper aware of all of the faces in the crowd, the piercing gazes of the judges, and the pressure to achieve a decade-long dream. They say all it takes is a flash of doubt. And on that day, doubt determined my fate. Sure, I had been national champion for 3 years in a row. But on that day, I stumbled. And I ended up missing the Olympic Games by a mere 0.25 tenths of a point. And they say it hurts when your dream falls apart, but there is nothing quite like the pain of being so close you can taste it. The regret of unfulfilled potential. And on that day, everything I believed about myself shattered. Because up until that point, for the last 10 years, I had assumed the identity of a gymnast, of a perfect good girl, who always got the gold medals, who always got the straight A's, who always did what my parents said, who always did what the coaches said. And I couldn't be that perfect girl anymore. The thing is, they also say that on the other side of your greatest fear is your greatest freedom. And my greatest fear had been missing the Olympics. It had been failing my family, failing my parents, failing the coaches, failing my country, failing every single person that had poured so much energy and time into my success. And I failed. And so I stood there thinking, what do I do now that I've failed everything, and this is my fear staring at me right in my face? And I realized that wasn't my biggest curse, that was my biggest blessing, because it was true, because on the other side of my greatest fear was my greatest freedom, because that was the first time I ever heard the stirrings of an inner voice, the beginning of my authentic strength and my authentic truth. And that voice said, screw this. This is not how my story ends. I do not end on a losing streak, because I realized that my identity wasn't that of a gymnast. My identity was that of a fighter and a winner. And winners do not leave on a losing streak. So on that same week that I missed the Olympic Games, I got my acceptance letter to my dream school at Yale University. But I had a decision to make at that point, because Yale wanted me to go right then and there that year. And if I left, I would be ending my career on that losing streak. And so I did the hardest thing that I knew possible, and I told Yale, no, not yet. So I deferred a year, and I decided to do something extremely crazy. I decided to buy a one-way ticket to Russia, to the Russian Olympic Training Center, to train at the most rigorous Olympic training camp in the world. Think Siberia in the middle of winter, where I had to train 9 hours a day, and nine hours a day, 6 days a week. And the reason I did that is because I wanted to end my story my way. I decided that I was going to have the greatest comeback story of my life, and this time I wasn't doing it for my parents. I wasn't doing it for my coaches. I wasn't doing it for the country. I was doing it for me, to prove to myself that it was enough, that I was enough, just because I wanted to. And so I spent the next 9 months training and traveling and competing all across Europe, Grand Prix competitions, World Cup competitions, until 9 months later, I arrived at my final competition of my gymnastics career, the USA National Championships. And this time, I arrived with the hard-earned confidence of someone who knew she had poured every single last ounce of effort into herself for herself. And on that competition, I ended up winning every single gold medal and Athlete of the Year. And then I said, peace, I'm out. The thing is, what I learned from that experience and what I gained from that experience wasn't the gold medals. It wasn't the applause. It wasn't the awards. It was something so much deeper. It was the understanding that no matter what happened going forward, I knew how to fall and get back up again. Because no matter how many times as a gymnast, imagine the experience of falling flat on your face in front of thousands of people with the pressure of an entire country on you, and having to feel the shame, the embarrassment, the humiliation, the guilt, and having to find something inside of you to say, just get back up, put a smile on your face and keep going, because the show must go on. And I call that the art of being unbreakable. To be unbreakable is not just to be resilient. So first, think about a fragile vase. If you take this vase and it shatters on the ground, it will shatter into hundreds of thousands of pieces, and any attempt to put this vase back together is always a bit worse than the original. Now, if you imagine something that's resilient, imagine a rubber band, and you might stretch the rubber band and you let it go and it goes back to its original form, and it's the same rubber band. But to be unbreakable, I use the example of the Japanese art called kintsugi, which literally means golden joinery. And in kintsugi art, what they do is they take a vase and they shatter the vase, and they take all the pieces of the vase and they join it back together with beautiful golden lacquer. So they literally highlight the cracks of this new vase that is more beautiful and more magnificent than it was in the beginning, when it was just a perfect, fragile vase. And that's the art of being unbreakable. It means that no matter how many times you fall, no matter how many pieces you shatter into, because you will experience catastrophic failure in your life, you will experience heartbreak, you will experience pain and trauma and all the things that are natural to the human experience, but somehow you'll find a way to become unbreakable. And that means taking all the pieces and literally turning that into a magnificent piece of art. And so I think that the strongest and most impressive and the most powerful people aren't the ones that are perfect, aren't the ones that have never encountered hardship. It's actually the people who have figured out how to be unbreakable, how to literally illuminate their cracks and turn all of that pain into something beautiful. So, as you embark on your journey, I want you to remember this imagery of this vase with all of the beautiful golden lacquer, the cracks that are highlighted, and remember that you have the power within you, so long as you remember that voice that says, no matter how many times I fall, I have the ability, I have the strength to get back up. And by the way, no one is going to tell you, no one around you is really going to remind you of that strength. So at the end of the day, it is always up to you to remember your truth, to feel that centering deep down, and be quiet enough to hear the voice that says, I have the power to keep going. So that's the first story that I want to share. The second thing that I think is always very surprising for people to hear when they hear me speak is that I spent my entire life being extremely introverted, like massively shy, and extremely insecure. And as a gymnast, if I wasn't in the gym, I was in the library. And I read the entire young adult section in the library because I had no friends. I couldn't speak up. Growing up in an all-white neighborhood as one of the few Asian girls, I always felt like an outsider. I always felt like there was something weird or ugly or wrong about me. And so in the library, I found my friends in the characters. And I found my role models. I found the strong characters who actually had voices and who had superpowers. And I always wished if only I could be one of those characters, if only I could have the strength of voice that they had. And I didn't know how to find that within myself. And one of my first memories growing up in preschool, growing up in Wisconsin, at that point, I still had 0 friends. And I got invited to my first birthday party. It was this little boy who I had a secret little crush on, and he invited me to his party, and I ran home to my mom and I said, Mom, we need to get a birthday present. This is my first birthday party. And at that point, our family really had no additional money to buy anything. So buying a birthday present for another kid was definitely out of budget, but my mom saw how excited I was and saw that I finally seemed like found a friend. So we went to the store and we found this really cool pickup truck, and we wrapped that up in a bow. And I remember going to this birthday party, and it was this huge table of kids. And everyone had their present on the table, and then the boy starts opening each of the presents one by one, and then he finally gets to my present. And I'm so excited. What is he going to say about my present? And so he takes the present and he unwraps it, and his eyes light up and he's like, wow, this is so cool. And I'm like, oh my gosh, he likes me. And he says, thank you so much. And I said, you're welcome. And that's when one of the girls snickers and she starts laughing and she starts pointing at me. She says, Lisa can't speak English. It's your welcome, not you welcome, dummy. And my face flushed red, and I felt this extreme shame and humiliation, and I thought, what is she talking about? My parents always say, you welcome. And that's when I realized it was you welcome in their Chinese accents. And then she got the entire table to start chanting, Lisa can't speak English, Lisa can't speak English, Lisa can't speak English. And I just wanted to disappear on the spot. And I was only 5 years old, 6 years old at the time, and that was the moment I decided, I don't like being Chinese. I don't like my heritage. I don't want like, I don't want any of this. And I committed to becoming really good at English. And I think many of us have had that experience, especially if we've come from immigrant households or just households that are different, where we've had that moment of shame for our culture, only to grow up and realize that it's actually pretty special. And looking back, I wish that it didn't take me that long to finally embrace my difference, to finally realize, wow, it's actually really cool to have different parts of myself, to have different types of cultures within me, to have such a wide aperture of what I can see as a woman, as an immigrant, as an American, as a woman of Chinese descent, with parents that have experienced so much that I never really got to experience. And so I brought this, well, initially, before I realized this, I kind of took this feeling of not belonging and I kept seeing it as I progressed, because in my gymnastics career, I was one of the few Asian faces. When I started my professional career, I started out in Wall Street and I was one of the few women in finance. And then when I started my entrepreneurial career, I took the leap into Silicon Valley, where I thought it was supposed to be an equal playing field, only to realize that, again, 94% of investors are men. And especially if you're an entrepreneur, only 2% of all venture funding goes to women, only 0.2% to women of color. And so here I was, very naive, walking in as a female entrepreneur, thinking, oh, I have a great shot at this, equal shot. And in one of my first investor meetings, it was an investor networking event, I walked in with my COO, and I was the CEO, and the investor walks straight over to my 35-year-old white male COO, shakes his hand, and brushes me off as the assistant. And at this point, it's a familiar feeling of wanting to shrink into the ground and feel like I'm disappearing and feel like extremely humiliated. But I realized that I've been here before. In fact, I've been here many times. And I think you're starting to see a theme that if you don't fit into the status quo, if you don't look a certain way within a certain dominant narrative, people make assumptions about you. And there was a certain point in my career that I realized that I don't have control of what other people think. And it is actually a very futile exercise for me to try and acclimate myself to their opinions, to try to be palatable, to be exactly what they are, because I'm not them. I'm not the status quo. And it's actually a pretty dumb exercise to try. So instead, I focused on what I can control. And I realized that what I can control is my energy, my feelings about myself, my thoughts, the things I say to myself, and all of that contributes to a certain level of presence and confidence. And there's a fine line between confidence and ego. And I'm sure we've all seen what ego looks like, especially unwarranted ego, undeserving ego. And so when I realized what I had in control, I realized that the number one thought that had always been missing in my life, that had always been missing in my head, was something so simple. And it was simply, I am enough. I have always been enough. I spent my whole life trying to prove to everyone, trying to prove to them that I was enough. And so I would do more and I'd do more and I would try to achieve and accomplish and rack up all of those accomplishments just to prove to everyone that I was enough. And that was because I always felt like I didn't belong, and I always felt like that people didn't like me, and I always felt like I was silent, and I always felt like I had nothing useful to say. And so I compensated for that by trying to overachieve and trying to make people see that I was enough. And the realization was that the only person that needed to realize I was enough was myself. And so, with all that said, the moment I realized I was enough, and the moment that I realized that I did not need anybody else's opinion to tell me that I was enough, was the moment that I unleashed my inner bad bitch. And I define a bad bitch as a woman who unapologetically takes charge of her body, her boundaries, and her bank account. A bad bitch knows what she wants, and she knows she is going to get it. And anybody who stands in her way better watch out. The core of being a bad bitch is really trusting yourself. And by the way, boys, men, you can be bad bitches too. Being a bad bitch means that you trust yourself. You trust that no matter what happens, you can get back up. You trust that no matter what the haters say, no matter what the critics, the naysayers say, that your voice matters. You trust that so long as you see it in your vision that it's possible, no matter what the current reality, it is possible because you live in the frequency of possibility. And so long as you live in the frequency of possibility, that is when everybody else rises to your standard. And so in order to achieve what you want to achieve, in order to create the reality you want to create, being a bad bitch means you see that and you refuse to let anybody else tell you that it's not possible, because you realize that the people who actually create change, the people who actually create impact, are the ones who have so much conviction in what they believe in. They might seem crazy to you, but the fact that they have that conviction, you actually think like, wow, maybe they're not that crazy. Maybe they actually see something that I don't. And that's how we start creating change, and that's how everyone starts lifting up. And that's what you all have the opportunity to do, given exactly where you are in your life, just the beginning. And so you can choose this path of possibility. You can choose this path of deciding what you want to stand for, of deciding what kind of impact you want to make, because believe me, anything is possible. And you need to surround yourself with the types of people who will say, yes, I believe in you, I support you, and let go of anybody who makes you play small before you've even started. So, bad bitches. The other thing I want to leave you with is that language has weight. There's a very specific reason why I chose the word bitch. Because I remember, came from very conservative Wall Street background, Silicon Valley, a very toxically male-dominated environment that tells women and people of color that you're not enough. And so when I first announced the title of my book, The Bad Bitch Business Bible, the number of people who said to me, maybe you should, just tone it down a little bit. Like, I don't think that's very professional. And what if people don't like the word bitch? And I realized that the people who had an issue with my title were actually the people who had the closest proximity to old power, old money, and old wealth. And they have a very strong voice. And what they really didn't like about my use of the word bitch was a sort of irreverence for old money, for old status, for old power. And I decided to use this word because for too long, this word has been hurled at women as a sort of derogatory word that says, you're too aggressive, you're too assertive, you're too cold, you're too pushy, you're too powerful. And I realized that this is a word that has been used to weaponize a woman's power against her, to make her afraid of her own power. And so part of this use of the word bitch is a reclamation of a word that has been used to harm a significant 50% of our population. And so reclaiming this word says, you can say what you want to me, but I already know I'm a bad bitch. So I want you to think of other words in our language, words that are derogatory, words that have been used to put down so many groups of people. And think about how you can shed light, how you can use language to uplift instead of to put down. Because your words matter and your voice matters, and the choice of words, the choice of language is so powerful. And so at the end of the day, the one thing about being a bad bitch, no matter who you are, is that you step into your full power, not when someone gives you permission to do so, but when you realize that you never needed permission in the first place. Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you. Thank you.